43%. That's how many retirees report feeling less happy than when they were working. Not slightly less, significantly less. I'm Michael, and that statistic stopped me cold 5 years into my Florida retirement because I was in that 43% and didn't even realize it. I'd confused not working with living well. They're not the same, not even close. The 5 things I'm sharing today aren't lifestyle tips. They're course corrections for the biggest psychological transition most of us will ever face. And if you're thinking, this won't apply to me, that's exactly what I thought, which is precisely why you need to hear this. Because here's what nobody tells you. This isn't another video about how to golf more or the best restaurants in Sarasota. This is about the psychological ambush that happens when your identity as a productive person disappears overnight, and nobody prepared you for the grief, the purposelessness, the strange shame of having made it but feeling emptier than ever. The lie you've been sold is that retirement is about stopping. Stop working, stop stressing, stop hustling. But humans aren't designed to stop. We're designed to evolve. I'm going to reframe retirement for you today, not as an ending, but as a reclamation. You'll discover why the most dangerous thing isn't running out of money, it's running out of reasons to wake up. And I'll show you the 5 specific behaviors that seem harmless, even logical, but actually accelerate decline rather than enhance freedom. If you're feeling lost, guilty for not being happier, or terrified that this is it, you're about to find relief, permission, and a completely different map forward. Let me start by telling you about my neighbor, Tom. Tom retired the same year I did, back in 1995. I remember the day he pulled up in his new RV, this massive thing that barely fit in his driveway. He had this grin on his face, this look of pure victory. He'd done it. 40 years with the same company, walked away with a pension that would let him do whatever he wanted. And for the first 6 months, Tom was everywhere. Community barbecues, morning walks, he bought a boat. One of those center console fishing boats that he'd clearly been fantasizing about for decades. You'd see him washing it every weekend, this ritual of pride. But then something shifted. Subtle at first. Tom stopped showing up to the community events. The boat sat in his driveway, and I started noticing a film of pollen on the windshield that never got wiped off. His golf cart, which used to zip around the neighborhood every evening, stayed parked. And the lights. I'll never forget the lights. I'm an early riser, always have been, and I started noticing Tom's living room light on at 3 in the morning. Then 4 in the morning, like clockwork. One day I saw him checking his mail and I walked over. Just casual neighbor stuff. Asked him how the boat was treating him. And Tom, this guy who'd been so vibrant 6 months earlier, he just looked at me with these tired eyes and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Michael, I thought I'd earned the right to do nothing. Turns out nothing is its own kind of hell." We stood there in the Florida heat, the sprinklers going off somewhere down the street, and Tom told me the truth. He said he'd spent 40 years complaining about work, fantasizing about freedom, building this entire identity around what he was going to do when I finally retire. Except when he finally retired, he realized he'd never actually figured out what that meant. He thought freedom meant absence. Absence of alarm clocks, absence of meetings, absence of stress. But what he got was absence of purpose, absence of structure, absence of identity. And then Tom asked me a question that burrowed into my soul and hasn't left since. He said, "Who are you when nobody needs you anymore?" I mumbled something about staying busy, about projects, about enjoying life. But that night, I couldn't sleep, because I didn't have an answer either. I'd been retired for 5 years at that point, and I was just starting to feel the same thing Tom was describing. This creeping sense of irrelevance. This weird guilt about not being happier. I had everything I'd worked for. A paid-off house and a beautiful community. Enough money that I didn't worry about bills. Good health. Freedom to do whatever I wanted, so why did I feel so empty? That question, who are you when nobody needs you, it became the beginning of my real education about retirement. Because retirement doesn't reveal who you are, it reveals who you've been avoiding becoming. And all those years I was working, I was so busy being productive, being needed, being useful, that I never had to confront the deeper question of who I actually was underneath all of that. Work gave me an identity, a title, a purpose that was externally validated every 2 weeks with a paycheck. And when that disappeared, I was left with this terrifying blank canvas and no idea what to paint. Let me tell you about what I call the calendar paradox. Imagine someone hands you the keys to this massive mansion. Infinite rooms, beautiful architecture, yours completely. But when you walk inside, there's no furniture, no art on the walls, no map telling you what each room is for. That's retirement. You inherit all this time, this vast expanse of unscheduled hours, and at first it feels intoxicating. Those first 6 months after I retired, I felt like I'd been released from prison. I could wake up whenever I wanted. I could spend 3 hours reading the newspaper. I could take a nap at 2 in the afternoon. I could drive to the beach on a Tuesday morning and just sit there. And I did all of those things. I reveled in it. This was freedom. This was what I'd earned. But around month 7, something shifted. I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't remember what day it was. Not in a funny, carefree way, in a deeply disorienting way. Tuesday felt like Saturday felt like Thursday. Nothing anchored me. And worse, nothing required me. I wasn't needed anywhere by anyone for anything. And that realization, it hit me like a weight in my chest. I started researching. I do that when I'm trying to understand something. I'm a reader, always have been. And I stumbled onto these studies about prisoner psychology, about what happens to people when they have too much unstructured time. And here's what blew my mind. Too much freedom creates the same psychological profile as too little freedom. Prisoners in solitary confinement and people with completely unstructured time both experience similar patterns of depression, anxiety, and loss of identity. The researchers called it temporal disorientation. When you don't have structure, your brain loses its ability to create meaning. Because meaning comes from context, from knowing that this hour matters because it's connected to something larger than just killing time. And that's what I was doing. I was killing time. Slowly, methodically, I was murdering the most precious resource I had by treating it like something to get through rather than something to live. So I made a change. I created what I call my first retirement ritual. Nothing fancy. Every morning at 7:30, I made coffee, sat in the same chair on my back porch, and I wrote in a journal for 20 minutes. That's it. Just 20 minutes of structured time where I asked myself questions. What matters to me today? What am I curious about? What do I want to create or learn or experience? And I can't fully explain this, but that simple act of creating structure, it felt like coming home to myself. It was like my brain had been floating in space and suddenly there was gravity again. That one ritual gave me a point of orientation, and from that point, I could build out. I added other structures, a weekly volunteer shift at the library, a standing coffee date with a friend every Thursday, a Spanish class on Tuesday evenings. But here's what I learned. Structure alone wasn't enough, because I was structuring the wrong things. I was filling my calendar, but I wasn't filling my soul. And that brings me to the 5 things I'd never do again. 5 traps I fell into that looked like wisdom, but were actually slow poison. The first thing I'd never do again is retire to a place instead of to a purpose. And I know, I live in Florida. Everyone retires to Florida. It's the promised land of retirement. No state income tax, beautiful weather, golf courses everywhere, early bird specials, the whole deal. And I'm not saying Florida is bad, I'm still here. But here's what I learned the hard way. Geography can't solve identity problems. You can move to paradise, but if you don't know who you are or what you're living for, paradise becomes a very beautiful cage. When I first moved to Florida, I thought the weather would make me happy. I thought the palm trees and the beaches and the sunshine would fill this hole I didn't even know I had. And for a while, the novelty worked. Everything felt like vacation. But vacation, by definition, is temporary. It's a break from real life. And when vacation becomes your permanent state, it stops being vacation. It just becomes life. And if you haven't figured out what makes life meaningful, no amount of sunshine is going to do it for you. I watched this happen to dozens of people in my community. They'd retire from up north, usually from places with brutal winters. They'd sell their houses, pack up their lives, and move to Florida with this expectation that changing their location would change their experience of being alive. And for the first year, they'd talk about the weather constantly. Can you believe it's 70 degrees in January? I don't miss shoveling snow one bit. Their entire identity became about what they'd escaped from, not what they were moving toward. But here's the thing. Once you've been in perpetual sunshine for 2 years, it stops being remarkable. It's just weather. And you're left with the same existential questions you had before, except now you don't even have the excuse of bad weather to blame for your unhappiness. I knew people who'd sit in their air-conditioned houses in paradise, watching TV, feeling just as lost as they did in Michigan. The only difference was they felt guilty about feeling lost, because shouldn't they be grateful? Shouldn't paradise be enough? The trap is treating location as the solution to what is fundamentally a purpose problem. When someone asks where you want to retire, the question underneath that question is, who do you want to become? What does this place call you to do? Not what does this place let you avoid? Because if you're retiring to a place primarily because of what it offers you in terms of comfort or convenience or escape, you're setting yourself up for that same hollow feeling I experienced. Let me give you a different framework. Instead of asking, where should I retire, ask, what do I want to grow into? What challenges do I want to take on? What kind of person do I want to be in my final chapters? And then, does this location support that becoming? Or does it enable my avoidance of it? Because here's the truth. Paradise is a psychological state, not a postal code. You can live in the most beautiful place on earth and feel dead inside. Or you can live somewhere ordinary and feel profoundly alive because you're connected to something that matters. I stayed in Florida, but I stopped treating it like an escape hatch. I started asking what Florida was calling me to become. And for me, that meant getting involved in the community in ways that required me to show up. Teaching financial literacy classes at the community center, mentoring younger retirees who were going through what I went through, learning about the local ecosystem and volunteering with environmental groups. Suddenly, Florida wasn't just a place where I lived. It was a place where I mattered, where my presence created ripples. And that shift, from retiring to a place to retiring into a purpose, that changed everything. But even if you get the location right, there's something even more insidious most retirees do. And this is the second thing I'd never do again. I'd never confuse consumption with creation, and this one got me bad for about 2 solid years. Here's what happens. You retire and suddenly you have all this time. And the world has made it incredibly easy to fill that time with consumption. You can watch unlimited television, streaming services, sports packages, news channels. You can scroll endlessly on your phone. You can go to restaurants, go shopping, go to shows, go to casinos, go on cruises. Everything is designed for you to consume, to receive, to be entertained. And at first it feels amazing. I remember thinking, I can watch an entire baseball game on a Wednesday afternoon. I can binge an entire series in a weekend. I can go to lunch and then to a movie, and then to dinner, and fill an entire day with pleasurable experiences. And I did. For 2 years, my primary activity was consumption. I consumed food, entertainment, information, experiences. I was a very well-fed, very entertained, very passive human being. But here's what I didn't understand about the neuroscience of it all. Consumption and creation trigger completely different chemical responses in your brain. When you consume, you get dopamine, that quick hit of pleasure. It feels good in the moment, but it doesn't last, and it doesn't build. It's like junk food for your brain. You need more and more of it to get the same feeling, and it never quite satisfies the deeper hunger. Creation, on the other hand, gives you serotonin, that deeper, more sustained sense of well-being and accomplishment. When you make something, when you build something, when you contribute something that didn't exist before you showed up, your brain registers that as meaningful. And meaning is what we're actually hungry for, not entertainment. Meaning, but here's the trap. We're trained our entire working lives to earn rest. You work hard, you deserve to relax. You put in your 40 or 50 hours, you've earned the right to zone out in front of the TV. And that logic works when rest is the minority of your time. When you work 5 days and rest 2, rest is restorative. But when rest becomes your default state, when consumption is how you spend the majority of your hours, it stops being rest. It becomes depletion. I'll never forget the day I realized this. I'd spent probably 4 hours watching TV, just channel surfing, watching whatever was on. And when I finally turned it off, I felt worse than when I started. Not rested, not refreshed, just foggy and kind of depressed. And I thought, what am I doing? I have the freedom to do anything, and I'm choosing to do nothing. Worse than nothing. I'm choosing to be a passive receiver of other people's creativity, other people's stories, other people's ideas. So I made a rule for myself. For every hour I spend consuming, I have to spend an equal amount of time creating. And creation doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be art or writing or starting a business. Creation is anything where you take what's inside you and make it external. Cooking a meal from scratch is creation. Gardening is creation. Having a real conversation where you share something vulnerable is creation. Building something with your hands is creation. Learning a new skill is creation because you're creating a new version of yourself. I started woodworking. I'd never done it before in my life, but I bought some basic tools and I started making things. Birdhouses at first, then small furniture pieces. Were they perfect? Absolutely not. My first birdhouse looked like it survived a tornado, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was using my hands, my mind, my creativity to bring something into existence. And that simple act of making, it filled something in me that all the TV watching and restaurant going never could. Your brain needs to feel useful, not just entertained. There's a massive difference. Entertainment is something you receive. Usefulness is something you create. And when you spend most of your time in receiving mode, your sense of agency, your sense that you matter, that you can impact the world, it atrophies. You start to feel like life is happening to you instead of through you. And that feeling, that's the beginning of the end. So I challenge you, if you're retired or planning to retire, look at your week. How much of it is consumption? How much of it is creation? And I'm not saying don't watch TV or don't go out to eat or don't enjoy leisure. I'm saying those things can't be the foundation. They have to be the seasoning, not the meal. Because if consumption is your primary activity, you're going to end up feeling empty no matter how much you consume. Now, creation helps. It absolutely helps. But there's a shadow side to it that nobody talks about. And this leads into the third thing I'd never do again. I'd never build an identity around the word former. Former teacher, former executive, former engineer, former whatever you used to be. And this one is subtle, but it's absolutely deadly to your ability to move forward. Here's what happens. You retire and people ask you the inevitable question. What do you do? And without thinking, you answer with what you used to do. I'm a retired accountant. I used to work in sales. I was a manager for 30 years. And every time you introduce yourself that way, you're reinforcing a backward-facing identity. You're telling yourself and everyone else that your peak is behind you, that the most interesting thing about you is something you don't do anymore. I did this for years. I'd meet someone new at a community event or at the grocery store, and within the first 2 minutes, I'd mention what I used to do for work, and I thought I was just giving context, helping them understand me. But what I was really doing was clinging to an identity that no longer existed because I hadn't built a new one to replace it. There's a grieving process that has to happen when you retire. You have to mourn the death of your working self. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean you literally have to grieve. That version of you, the one who went to an office or a job site or a classroom every day, the one who had a title and a role and a clear sense of purpose, that person is gone. They don't exist anymore. And if you don't properly grieve that loss, if you don't allow yourself to feel the sadness and the disorientation and the fear of what comes next, you'll get stuck. You'll become a ghost of who you used to be, haunting your own present. The phrase former is a trap because it keeps you tethered to the past. It makes your identity about what you're no longer doing instead of what you're becoming. And the truth is, if someone asks you what you do and the only answer you have is about your past, you're not living in the present. You're existing in a kind of limbo, waiting for something to give you permission to be relevant again. I learned this the hard way. About 7 years into retirement, I was at a community potluck, and I met this woman named Carol. Carol was maybe 10 years older than me, and she had this energy about her, this aliveness. And we got to talking, and at some point I asked her what she did before she retired, and Carol just looked at me with this gentle smile and said, "I don't really think about it that way anymore. What I did before was preparation. What I'm doing now is living." And I pressed her, "Come on, what did you used to do?" And she said, "I was a nurse for 40 years. But if I keep identifying as a nurse, I'm not leaving room to discover who else I can be." And then she told me about her current life. She was learning to paint. She volunteered at an animal shelter. She'd started a book club. She was teaching herself piano. And none of those things had anything to do with nursing. They were pure Carol. The version of Carol that was emerging now that she had the space and time to explore. That conversation gutted me, because I realized I'd been introducing myself as a former whatever for 7 years. And every time I did it, I was reinforcing this belief that my best days were behind me, that I was winding down, that I was less than I used to be. And that belief, it's poison. It seeps into everything. How you carry yourself, how you approach new experiences, whether you even try new things or just resign yourself to managing decline. So I made a decision. I stopped using the word former. If someone asks me what I do, I tell them what I'm actually doing. I'm learning Spanish. I'm working on a memoir. I'm volunteering. I'm spending time with my grandkids. I'm figuring out what it means to live well in this chapter. And yes, sometimes people probe. But what did you used to do? And I'll answer if they really want to know, but I don't lead with it. Because my past isn't my identity, it's my history. There's a difference. And here's the challenge I want to give you. Try this. Introduce yourself to someone new without mentioning what you used to do for work. See how long you can go in a conversation without referencing your former career. It's harder than you think. Because for most of us, our work identity was the biggest, most validated part of who we were. And letting it go feels like cutting off a limb. But you have to cut it off. Not because your past doesn't matter, but because clinging to it prevents you from discovering who you're becoming. You're not a former anything. You're in active transformation. And transformation requires that you stop looking backward and start looking around at what's possible right now. The moment you stop defining yourself by what you used to be is the moment you become available for what's next. Now, letting go of your old identity is crucial, but there's a way most people do it that actually makes things worse, and this is the fourth thing I'd never do again. I'd never isolate under the guise of earned solitude. And this one almost killed me. Not literally, but close. Here's what happens. You retire and you've spent decades being around people. Coworkers, clients, customers, bosses, employees. Your days were filled with social interaction, most of it probably exhausting or performative or political. And so when you retire, there's this incredible relief. You don't have to perform anymore. You don't have to make small talk in the break room. You don't have to attend meetings or networking events or office parties. You're free. And that freedom feels amazing. And if you're an introvert, which I am, you think, finally, I can just be alone. I've earned this. I've earned the right to not have to socialize, to not have to be on, to not have to manage relationships I don't care about. And so you start pulling back. You decline invitations. You stop reaching out. You tell yourself you're just enjoying your solitude, your earned peace and quiet. But here's what I didn't realize. There's a massive difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude is restorative. It's chosen. It's intentional time alone to recharge, to think, to create. Isolation is corrosive. It's avoidance. It's the slow severing of meaningful connection. And the line between them is thinner than you think. I went 3 weeks once without having a meaningful conversation with another human being. 3 weeks. I talked to cashiers at the grocery store. I exchanged pleasantries with neighbors in passing. But an actual conversation where someone asked me how I was really doing, and I answered honestly, where I was curious about someone else's inner life, where there was real presence and vulnerability. 3 weeks, and I didn't even notice it was happening until I did. And when I did, I felt this wave of shame and loneliness that almost knocked me over. The data on this is terrifying. Social isolation is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's worse for your health than obesity. It increases your risk of dementia, depression, heart disease, early death. And it's not just about being around people. You can be around people and still be isolated. It's about meaningful connection, about being seen, about being known, about mattering to someone and having someone matter to you. But here's the trap for men especially, and I'm going to talk about this because I'm a man and this was my experience. We confuse independence with isolation. We've been taught our whole lives that needing people is weakness, that real strength is being self-sufficient. And so we retire and we think, I don't need to depend on anyone anymore. I've got my routine, I'm fine. And we mistake that for strength when it's actually a kind of slow emotional suicide. I have a friend, another retiree, who once told me that his wife was his only friend. And when she died, he realized he didn't know how to connect with another human being. He didn't have practice. He'd outsourced all of his emotional and social needs to one person. And when she was gone, he didn't know how to be with people. He'd forgotten. Or maybe he'd never really learned. And he spent the next 5 years in profound loneliness before he finally, out of desperation, joined a men's group. And that's what I did too. I joined a men's group. And I'm not going to lie, the first 6 months I hated it. It felt forced. It felt awkward. Sitting in a circle with 8 other retired guys talking about our feelings, our fears, our lives, it felt like therapy without the therapist. And I'm a private person. I don't share easily. But I kept showing up because I'd made a commitment. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice it, something shifted. I started to care about these guys. I started to look forward to our meetings. And more importantly, I started to remember what it felt like to be known. Not surface level known, deeply known. To share something I was struggling with and have someone look at me and say, me too. Or to listen to someone else's struggle and realize I wasn't alone in feeling lost or scared or inadequate. Connection isn't a nice to have in retirement. It's essential. Your introversion might be real, or it might be unhealed social anxiety. Your desire for solitude might be healthy, or it might be depression wearing a mask. And you have to be honest with yourself about which one it is. Because the cost of getting it wrong is massive. So I made a rule for myself: 1 meaningful conversation per week. Non-negotiable. Not small talk, not logistics. A real conversation where I show up as a full human being and invite someone else to do the same. Some weeks that conversation happens in my men's group. Some weeks it's with a friend over coffee. Some weeks it's with my daughter on the phone. But it has to happen, because without it, I start to drift. I start to lose the thread of my own humanity. And here's what surprised me. The more connected I became, the more I enjoyed my solitude. Because it stopped being isolation and started being chosen rest. I wasn't alone because I was afraid of people or because I didn't know how to connect. I was alone because I wanted to be, and I knew I had people I could reach out to whenever I needed them. There's a peace in that, a security that makes solitude sweet instead of suffocating. So if you're isolating, if you're telling yourself you've earned the right to be alone, I want you to ask yourself honestly, is this solitude or is this isolation? Am I choosing rest or am I avoiding vulnerability? Because retirement will give you all the space in the world to hide from connection if you want to. But hiding will kill you. Slowly, quietly, it will kill you. Connection matters. But there's one final thing that undermines everything else. And this is the 5th thing I'd never do again. I'd never treat my body like the project is over. And this one I'm almost embarrassed to talk about because I knew better. I knew better and I did it anyway. Here's what happened. I retired at 62. I was in pretty good shape. Not an athlete, but I walked regularly, played some tennis, ate reasonably well. And then I retired and I thought, I've worked hard my whole life. I've earned the right to relax, to enjoy myself, to not worry so much about what I eat or whether I exercise. I've been disciplined for decades. Now I can let go a little, so I did. I let go. I started eating more. Not dramatically more, just a little more at every meal. Seconds at dinner. Dessert most nights, bigger breakfasts. And I stopped exercising as consistently. I'd skip my walks if it was too hot or too cold, or if I just didn't feel like it. And the weight came on slowly. 2 pounds here, 3 pounds there. And I'd notice, but I'd tell myself it was fine. This is what happens when you get older. This is natural. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I can relax. 3 years into retirement, I'd gained 40 pounds. 40. And I'm not a tall guy, so 40 pounds was significant. My pants didn't fit. I was winded walking upstairs. I stopped wanting to do physical activities because they were harder than they used to be. And I told myself I was enjoying life. That this was part of the deal. That vanity and fitness were for younger people, and I'd earned the right to just be comfortable. But here's the truth I didn't want to face. Letting my body go wasn't enjoying life. It was giving up on life. Because your body is the only vehicle you have for the next 20 or 30 years. It's the only way you experience the world. And when you stop taking care of it, when you treat it like the project is over, you're not enjoying life. You're surrendering it. The brutal truth is this: physical decline isn't inevitable, neglect is. And the narrative that getting old means getting weak and sick and limited, that narrative is only half true. Yes, aging brings changes, but the vast majority of the decline we associate with aging isn't aging, it's disuse. It's giving up. It's deciding that because you're not young anymore, there's no point in being strong or mobile or capable. And here's what I learned when I finally decided to get serious about my health again. Physical challenge isn't about vanity. It's about staying present in your own life. When you stop challenging your body, you start checking out psychologically. You start living smaller. You avoid experiences because they might be too hard physically. You stop traveling because walking through airports is exhausting. You stop playing with your grandkids because you can't get down on the floor without struggling to get back up. Movement is an antidepressant. The research on this is overwhelming. Regular physical activity is as effective as medication for mild to moderate depression. Strength training protects your brain from cognitive decline. Exercise improves sleep, reduces inflammation, stabilizes mood, increases energy. But more than any of that, staying physically active keeps you engaged with your own aliveness. It reminds you that you're still here, still capable, still becoming. I started working with a trainer when I was 67. And I'm not talking about bodybuilding or running marathons. I'm talking about basic strength training, learning to lift weights properly, building muscle that I'd lost, working on balance and flexibility. And it was humbling. I couldn't do things that used to be easy. I had to start at the beginning with light weights and simple movements, and my ego hated it. But I kept showing up, and here's what changed. Everything. My energy came back, my mood stabilized, I started sleeping better. I lost the weight I'd gained and kept it off. But more than any of that, I started feeling like I was living in my body again instead of just dragging it around. I started saying yes to physical experiences, hiking with my grandkids, taking a kayaking trip, walking on the beach at sunrise, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's a metaphor I love. Your body is a garden, not a monument. You don't just admire it for what it used to be, you tend it, you care for it, you nurture it so it can continue to produce and grow and bloom. And when you stop tending it, it doesn't stay frozen in its former glory. It becomes overgrown. Weeds take over. Things die. So treating your body like the project is over, it's not self-compassion, it's self-abandonment. And I'm not saying you have to be at the gym every day or eat perfectly or look like you did at 30. I'm saying you have to care. You have to show up for your body the way you'd show up for anything else you love. With consistency, with kindness, with the recognition that this matters. And here's the hard truth. If you don't take care of your body now, in 10 years, you won't have the option. The decline will become real, not just a choice you're making. And you'll look back and wish you'd started earlier. You'll wish you'd treated these years as preparation for your 80s and 90s, not as a slow surrender. So those are the 5 things. Retiring to a place instead of to a purpose. Confusing consumption with creation. Building an identity around the word former. Isolating under the guise of earned solitude. Treating your body like the project is over. 5 traps that look like wisdom, but are actually slow poison. And if you're feeling that weight in your chest right now, that recognition that you've fallen into some or all of these, I need you to hear this. Awareness without action is just sophisticated procrastination. So here's what you actually do. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the like button. I'm going to keep spreading this information from my life and hopefully spread the awareness needed to as many people that need to hear it. If you have any friends thinking about retiring in Florida or retiring in general, send this video their way. Because as always, retirement is a beautiful part of our lives and we should treat it as such.